Welcome to the Thinking Practitioner Podcast,
a podcast where we dig into the fascinating issues, conditions, and quandaries in the massage and manual therapy world today.
I'm Whitney Lowe.
And I'm Til Luchau.
Welcome to the Thinking Practitioner.
Hi, I'm Til Luchau. When I was looking for a publisher for a book I wanted to put out, I was fortunate to have ended up with two offers, one from a large international media conglomerate and the other from Handspring, a small public island run by four great people who love great books and who love our field. To this day, I'm glad I chose to go with them, Handspring, because not only did they help me make the books I wanted to share with you, the A&T series, but their catalog has emerged as one of the leading collections of professional level books written especially for body workers, movement teachers, and all professionals who use movement or touch to help patients achieve wellness.
And I'm Whitney Lowe, and Handspring's Move to Learn webinars are free 45-minute broadcasts featuring their authors, including one with you, Til. So head on over to their website at handspringpublishing.com to check those out. And be sure to use the code TTP at checkout for a discount. And thanks again, Handspring, for supporting and sponsoring the podcast. Good day, sir. How are things in the Rocky Mountains today?
Things here are very good. A bright, windy day with a chance to sit with you and look back on this past year of podcasting with you. What a pleasure. And how are you doing?
I'm doing well. It is Reflection Day for us, apparently. So this is coming out in December, and this is time for us. This is the time of year when we all tend to sort of look back over the year and wax over the things that we have done, where we've been, the paths that we have taken. So we're going to do that a little bit today in our podcast. Take a look at some highlights from episodes over the past year, some things that we got out of it, and maybe suggest some things for everybody else to take a look at, dive deeper in it as well. So
it's because it's surprised me to see how much we'd covered. And so I think it's a great exercise just for us to go back and update. I want to hear how your takeaway is and how you're thinking about some of those conversations we had in the last year. But like you said, maybe it'll give listeners a shortcut back into some things you're interested in diving into some more.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as we get into this, I wanted to say also a thank you again to you for hanging out with me over the past year, because this is something I look forward to every 2 weeks to get to dive into some of these conversations and see what I can learn and do. So I really appreciate your time and desire to keep going with it.
That's touching. And yeah, I feel the same. It's true. I really enjoy these conversations, and it's great to be able to bounce ideas off of you. And, some of the feedback we've received is that people really like it when we disagree.
Yeah.
So I'm
what?
I'm looking for maybe, yeah, we'll talk about that.
We don't. It's a load of crap.
I know, but I appreciate being able to do that with you too, and think these things through from different points of view.
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, let's see what we agree or disagree on for our takeaways from this year. Yeah.
So that first episode we did in 2021, episode 30, was on, we called it Excuses, Our Favorite Reasons Not to Blank. And we were talking about what seemed to get in our way of, at that point, it was New Year's resolutions or things that we wanted to change. What do we do that instead of doing those things that we wanted to do for ourselves? Is that how you remember it?
It is indeed. Yeah. I went back and kind of listened and looked over some of the things that we talked about. And I think that was a big thing that I think is a pervasive challenge for a lot of us. And one of the things that I was going to kind of reflect back on as I looked over this again is that, I was trying to reflect on about some of my processes and, focusing on this was also calling into attention one of the episodes that we did last year, the one about how we chart our own path in educational processes, and thinking about like the pandemic has forced us into a lot of unusual types of circumstances. For example, with continuing education courses and so many of the live courses being canceled, people were sort of forced into doing online education things. And many of those are self-directed things that you sort of do on your own time. And there's a lot of instances, and I know in our program, where people like jump in with great intention and, purchase a whole bunch of courses, and then we never see them again. And,
right.
I'm guilty of it too. I've got a list of all kinds of things that I have seen. Oh, wow, this is great. I want to do this and, jump into this course and, sign up for something. And then it's like, couple months later, like, oh, I forgot about that thing. So,
Well,
some of it
huge.
is,
That's true. You and I are basically like shoveling content out into the world, and the uptake is healthy, but not everyone ends up completing it.
yeah,
Because of maybe some of those reasons. That's not always a bad thing, but I know I spend a lot of time thinking about, I bet you do too, how do I help people, at least in the courses, how do I help them see it through? How do I help them stay engaged?
yeah,
But I appreciated the perspective we took to talk about what got in our way, because there's so many, time management strategies or goal achievement strategies, but to really, and sometimes celebrate the things that we do instead, was a nice break as well.
yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned how do we chart our path or whatever that was. That was episode 17. I looked it up.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Go back to that one.
Yeah. So that's, those were some of the things that came to my attention with us focusing on those kinds of things. And I went back and I was looking over some of the stats that you had mentioned in that episode as well about the percentage of people that actually follow through on New Year's resolutions and things like that. Right. And it's kind of depressing. Yeah.
Yes. It's depressing if our goal is to follow through.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
And some of it's the spaghetti against the wall effect too,
Yeah.
We try a bunch of things and the things that stick are done, ready for, those are the ones we're ready for.
Yeah. So
then what do we do?
I think our next episode, we talked about cervicogenic headaches. And that was a fascinating one. I was really interested in this particular episode. I got a lot out of your classification schema on those different headaches. That was a real interesting thing that you shared with us there.
Well, that was inspired by Toby Hall, some research he'd done around cervicogenic headaches. And they're a bit controversial as whether they're a thing or not in other ways, but there seems to be this class of headaches that responds really well to manual therapy. And one of the key definers is, does movement of the neck make it worse? And if it does, that's, at least has a cervicogenic component, you could say, to that headache. And since we work a lot with movement and with sensitivity of the tissues around movement, then there's a lot we can often do for that kind of headache. Yeah. So yeah, it was a fun deep dive for me as well.
Yeah. Always good for us to review a lot of these kinds of topics. And, for the, listeners and practitioners out there too, just as a reminder, when you come upon things, you're like, oh yeah, I took a class on neck things, or, I read a bunch of stuff about neck things. It's always helpful to go back and do that again, because, as we prepare for these episodes, we're often, well, I'll speak for myself, but I imagine the same is true for you. We're often going back and reading things that we've read before, or looking at things that we've seen before, and looking to see what's new and different as well. And I always get more out of it. Like, oh, I've read this article years ago and I missed that thing, so, and neck and headache pain is such a common thing for people to come see us for. It's a good one to go back and really dive into.
That was episode 31.
Yeah.
So in episode 32, I talked to my old friend, mentor and colleague, Art Riggs, about his, just hearing some of his stories. And the subject was aging and aging well. Because he's probably, 15 years or so older than you and me.
Yeah.
And he never ceases to surprise me about how engaged he is, how energetic he is, and yet his attitude toward the numerous challenges that he faces, in his own body and in his life, is always an inspiration to me.
Yeah, I listened to this episode and was really interested in some of the different perspectives that you both shared in there, and this, the aging thing is one of those things that it's been more on my radar as of late. When this episode comes out, I'm just a few weeks away from turning 60. And so we're at, some of those ages. And I've just kind of felt this was interesting, watching a lot of the icons of my youth. And that was, the rock and roll generation, mainly of the 60s and 70s, all these people that were the rebellious youth at that time, being old people now, old men and old women, and dealing with those issues about being old and aging and things like that. And it's just, it's brought a lot of things to the forefront about, looking at where we are in our lives and how how those things affect us, each one of us, as we get to those places.
And here we are doing our greatest hits, Whitney. Here we are.
Yeah. Okay. I remember when. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then you had a lovely conversation with Drew Friedman, the Boston bodyworker.
Yeah. Yeah. Drew's been a colleague and friend of mine for a number of years, and I've watched him just accomplish some really stellar things with what he's done with the Boston Bodyworker group there. And he's had some real challenges with his clinic situation as a result of the COVID pandemic, as have many. I've talked to practitioners all over the country. Lots of them have had similar kinds of things, especially, running clinics and being unable to overcome some of the financial challenges that happened. This was during the height of the kind of the winter shutdown before the vaccines were around and that sort of thing. And just the financial pressures that this whole thing has brought on to all of us. It really tests us in many different ways of being able to withstand some of those challenges.
That's right. And just to hear the stories were powerful, but then his resilience and his kind of pragmatic attitudes, like, here's what we had to do.
Yeah.
And how he, stayed oriented around the things that still worked and the things he still loved to do. It was great.
Yeah. So
that was episode 33.
In episode 33. And then in 34, we took a deep dive on thoracic outlet syndrome.
Yeah.
One of those interesting conditions that's, one of the things that we highlighted in there is the difficulty of kind of pinning down what this even is, just because there's so many different discussions and perspectives about thoracic outlet syndrome. And really, we tried to kind of peel it apart and identify some things, especially some of the different variations on this with, potential entrapment of the brachial plexus in numerous locations between the scalenes, with cervical ribs and underneath the pec minor, et cetera. So we're kind of peeling apart some of those things to try to get a better idea of what this actually is, because it's kind of one of those things that's not so well defined in our field.
And yet, that can be a barrier to understanding any set of symptoms, that it's hard to define. And thoracic outlet is one of those where, oh my gosh, it can be one of these three syndromes. And that gives this sense that it's predictable and reducible to a set of techniques. And sometimes it is, but many times it's not. So it was great to unpack or tease that apart with you. What other factors might be there, and some actual strategies for that one.
Yeah. And I think this also highlights just the importance of, like you said, to being a little cognizant of the ways in which we try to compartmentalize our understanding of some of these things into discrete conditions and problems that have clearly defined boundaries, because that can get to be a challenge in and of itself.
Well, and I am way into the complexity and not pigeonholing things, and understanding that things are often complicated or multi-causal or even hard to pin down.
Yeah.
But that's not where I like ending the conversation, because even in those situations, there's still things we can do. There's still things that we can perceive or assess or sense, and things we can do that help. So that's important for me to bring in too.
Yeah.
And I think we did that there as well.
Yeah. And what do we do in 35?
35 was fun. That was we traded geek lists of things that inspire our learning. Resources that inspire our learning is what we called it after the fact. But we got into like our favorite podcasts, our favorite tech tools, our favorite music even.
Yeah.
And it was I got some great ideas from you and went and checked it out. It was fun just to go through some of mine as well.
Yeah, likewise. I got some really good places to go look at things. Something came up for me looking back at this episode and looking over the script about it. I was in a conversation with somebody the other day that was talking about book collections, because I have too many books. And it's in the olden days, a lot of it was they were falling off my bookshelves because I was running out of space in my office, and now they're falling off my iPad because I have so many books loaded onto my iPad. It gets heavier and heavier by the day.
Really? Okay.
But they were talking about like, hey, do you really need all these books? And I said, I heard this great analogy from somebody else. It's like a really fine wine collection. I may not ever drink all of those bottles, completely myself, but knowing that they're there and knowing that I can go there and find things. And sometimes I do just go get one little piece out of this book because I need it right at this time. That's why I like to kind of gather those things up. And we talked in that episode a lot about collectors, who were the collectors that were gathering that kind of stuff and holding on to it. And so that's one of my faults about gathering and not letting go of things is just around books and resources.
I think I'm there with you. I like the company of books.
Yeah.
They are not clutter in my mental landscape. They're companionship.
Yeah.
The more the better in some ways.
Yeah. And I acknowledge a fair degree of the FOMO, for those who know that is acronym FOMO, the fear of missing out. Yeah. I have that, like, if I don't get this, there's going to be some gem in there that I'm going to wish I had, so I've got that on those kinds of resources.
So of course you read them all.
Yeah.
Or else you go to our episode 30 and pick one of those excuses not to.
There you go. Right. Yeah.
Good.
So speaking of learning, yes.
36, you talked to Robin Anderson. That was cool, about research, education, her work with the foundation, her work with her community college, a bunch of things.
So this was an education deep dive, and we were both kind of geeking out on this, being, educational geeks about this. And one of the things that really kind of came back to me about this episode that is a thing that I think about a great deal and really ponder about is really, and this question has been coming up for years, is, where are we going in our field and profession with our training programs? Are we going towards the future of traditional degree programs? Will we stay as proprietary educational, small micro credentialing programs and things like that? And these are some huge questions, I think, that will have a great deal to do with steering the direction of where we're going in the future. And I don't know, there's a lot of people who just feel like we need to increase standards and increase the participation in the traditional academic environment with, getting massage therapy, for example, to be a degree program. And I'm not so sold on that idea as I used to be, just because of a lot of things that I see changing in the educational landscape. So I think a lot of this is going to happen after I have already hung up my cleats, but I am very interested in trying to look at the future of where those things are going and see what kind of, places I'll participate in the direction somewhere down the road. So, yeah.
That's quite an image, hanging up your cleats.
I'm not there yet, but no. It's closer than it was.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I wanted to ask you just this question, and I'm going to bounce back for a second to our question about, or your episode about aging with art rigs, and just ask you this. Do you happen to remember the time when you kind of looked around at your world and said, there's probably more behind me than there is ahead of me?
Yeah, for sure.
Do you remember when?
Probably 40th birthday.
Who
knows? Maybe numerically not, but it sure felt like the crest of a hill in many ways.
Yeah.
It's okay, downhill from here.
I don't think I really slowed down enough to kind of have that perspective and think about it until I was in my late 40s, even almost maybe even to my early 50s. I think I started really thinking along those lines.
No, that's true. There's different levels of reflection on that perspective and different ways it looks too on this side of the hill.
Yeah.
And you're coming up to your 60th. So that's just such a great thing. But my 60th, which was pretty recent too, was so powerful for me personally. And in spite of, being much less of my life likely left than is behind me, it did somehow excite me to be facing it and to realize there's so much that's possible. Ended up, having a conversation. Art Riggs was there, in fact, with I invited many of my older friends to talk to me about aging. And we had a Zoom birthday party, and it was really, it was really helpful and useful.
Yeah. Well, speaking of getting older and having those kinds of things happen, my shoulder's been bothering me a lot lately. And we talked about shoulder pain in episode 37.
Yeah, I was going to say, I got an episode for that.
Yeah.
That was episode 37, shoulder pain, impingement, and rotator cuff issues. Do you think what's going on with you fits in that category?
Not quite. I think I've got
Okay.
more bicipital tendon issues, but that could be, impingement could be going on there to some degree. So there could be some impingement problems happening there. But yeah, we talked about terminology issues and some, looking at some new perspectives around some of those kinds of things with, alternative causes of potential shoulder pain. And what is the formerly called shoulder impingement syndrome, and
Right.
what are we now looking at with terminology around that, and how does that also change our perspective of what's going on in there?
And the short version is it seems to be really useful to call the situation for its effects rather than for its presumed cause. So, the pain in your shoulder is probably a much more accurate description than an impinged bicipital tendon, for example.
Yeah.
Because there can be so many mechanisms involved, and there's so many debates about that, that when we come into, this is the point we made there, when we come into it, assuming a mechanism that shapes our approach, and if we come in assuming an effect, then we can probably be even more specific in what we're doing.
Yeah. And I also have to believe that this has an impact too on the way the client perceives what's going on with them, in terms of talking
Absolutely.
about, oh, I've got something pinched in there. I got to spread it apart or something like that. Just the mindset of what needs to happen there. And so yeah, I think the words matter. The words and the names matter.
Well, and then we went and continued the conversation in 38 and called it frozen shoulder, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
Which is one of those terms that brings to mind all sorts of probably unhelpful things.
Yeah.
But we talked about that, and we talked about, again, some of the questions involved about mechanisms, some of the populations that are most likely affected, or factors in how that comes up, and some of the thoughts, the conventional wisdom about it having a natural history, meaning resolving itself in many cases. Does that seem to be the case or not? And then the role of manual therapy, of course.
Yeah. An important distinction, I think, too, about this, because this is another one of those conditions that is so poorly defined and poorly identified in many situations, is, making some distinctions between those things that are muscular bound restrictions of the shoulder as opposed to a true adhesive capsule situation, because that's oftentimes poorly delineated in many cases.
I like how you consider the capsule true.
Consider it true?
Yeah, you said a true capsular adhesion.
Yeah.
But or sometimes we'll call it, if it's like tissue based, we'll call it real. It's really stuck. It's not just that we're not
imaginatively stuck.
Right. But that's I actually like flipping that for myself. It's a good distinction. It's one I use all the time in my work. Is it stuck together on the physical plane, or is it more of a subjective experience of being painful to move, and so I don't?
Yeah,
for whatever reason. I really like that distinction, but I challenge myself on my assumptions about which is more real, or which I can affect and which I can't, or those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and the word "true" is probably inappropriately used there. We should just call it capsular adhesion. I guess one of the reasons that word has snuck in there so much is because there's been so much false description of that as a capsulitis when it really wasn't. And so we talked about, well, this one really is capsulitis, or really is capsular
That's true.
adhesion.
There's that word again. That's true. That the debate does get true or false around what is the mechanism, rather than what is the effect. And it's a bias that is so pervasive in probably ever since Descartes, which is saying, there's the material world and there's the mental, or the outer world and the inner world. And with the outer world, the one we share, in quotes, objectively is the true one, and the other one is subjective and cool too, but not as real. Yeah. Which, with your psychology background and with mine, early on, that's not a distinction that is as pronounced in the world of psychology as it would be, say, in physics or something. Yeah. And then bodywork is somewhere here in the middle, where people hurt, and that can have a physical component, or maybe not, and which one is true. Yeah.
And I would say all of those things force us in the direction of some interesting critical thinking.
Okay.
Which is our segue into episode 39 discussion you had with Ruth Werner.
Smooth. Nice. I like how you got me back on track there.
That's right.
Yeah, Ruth and we really missed you. We wanted you to be there, but the timing didn't work out. We had a great conversation about thinking critically. And this was I think she had either just published or was about to publish her extensive article in Massage and Bodywork magazine about that same topic.
Yeah.
And she had interviewed me, I think you too, and some of the people in preparation for that article. And we just got started. So then I wanted to talk to her. So I got a chance to interview her in depth in that conversation. And I always like talking to Ruth. It was a good conversation.
Yeah. Yes. And you all got into some really interesting, fascinating stuff there. And that kind of segued into also the piece that we ended up doing for the ABMP CE Summit on critical thinking too. And that was a nice expansion of some of those ideas as well.
We got to be on that panel together and each share some of our perspectives.
Yeah.
On critical thinking. That was fairly recently. Yeah.
Yeah. And Cal Cates was on that panel, which segues us into our next episode 40 here.
Yep. Cal was there with us, and it was how not to fix it. And Cal wanted to talk about death and dying. And I was like, okay, let's do.
It's an interesting topic we don't really get into that much, certainly on our podcast, and it doesn't get a whole lot of traction, I think, in our field. But Cal had written this article a while back and had gotten quite some response and feedback from people about looking at those things. And Cal was talking about how this has impacted practice and interactions with clients and things like that, and some very fascinating aspects of that.
That's right. No, her article, we do talk about her article, which I think was 2018, and then some of the more recent work around death and dying. And it was a fascinating dimension. And that's the focus of Cal's work with her group Heal Well too. So we got to hear how they're doing that in hospitals and hospices and training providers, things like that, as well as things we can all consider in our own process of moving forward with life and being with clients who are doing that.
Mm-hmm. And this is one of those episodes that I enjoyed a lot because it really got me way outside my traditional sort of comfort zone of things that I focus on a lot with my work and the orientation of what I'm usually doing. So I was out there a good bit in more unfamiliar territory, and that always is helpful for pushing the edge of learning more significantly. So got a lot out of that whole discussion.
Me too. And just want to give Cal and her group a plug, Heal Well. They were kind enough to actually formally sponsor us for a few episodes there, but it's the emotional support or the moral support we give each other is really mutual and appreciated there.
Yeah,
well.
Indeed. And then in episode 41, we went again to another interview episode, this one with Diane Matkowski, the massage mentor. And this was also some fascinating stuff that she had been getting into at this time too, with the kicking off the shoulder jam and a lot of the other educational ventures that she's into, and just been a really good, I think, role model for so many people about seeing a vision, carrying it through, and really creating all kinds of opportunities for people. It was an inspiring picture.
We called it Going For It because that's what Diane did. And Diane's she's my buddy, but she's also just such a big inspiration about how she'll get an idea and then just make it happen. And she's building big things as we speak. And in fact, I hope to get her back. I think it is probably next episode to talk about her next project, the Inside Job series that you're a teacher on as well.
Yeah. So we're looking forward to that. Another discussion with her about some of those kinds of things, because these are some of the things that are about the vision that drives us to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish and get to the places that we want to get to. And like so many people do wonderful things on a day in, day out basis with their clients in the treatment room. But a lot of times it's really helpful to focus on and think about that bigger vision of why do you go through the difficulties and challenges that work really entails? What is it that's, your mission behind the whole thing? I think it's really helpful for us all to remember and align with that when we can.
That's right. And then her tagline is, success is an inside job. It's just, that speaks a lot right there. It's
yes,
great.
Indeed. Yeah.
Cathy Ryan was with us in episode 42 to talk about scars and scar tissue, something that's become a specialty for her after the book she wrote for Handspring on the subject. So she was somebody that I went to at a time that my wife was going through some treatment that involved a lot of scar recovery and things like that. So Cathy was a great advisor to me. She's also somebody I went to and interviewed in my putting together our inflammation series. So it was fun to close the circle and talk to her a little more and very specifically about working with scar tissue in a massage therapy context.
Yeah. And this is a topic that I think really needs a lot of kind of updating and looking at some of the newer research and stuff, because many of us were taught some sort of formal ideas about scar tissue that haven't proven to be what we thought they were initially, with how it's managed, what it is, and what it does. And she was bringing some really good perspectives with newer research and understanding of some of these kinds of concepts and how to work with them on a therapeutic level. That was really helpful, I thought.
Yeah, it was.
Mm-hmm.
Then
in 43, you had a solo episode interview there. That was interesting as well.
That was with Marcela Ot'alora, who is a researcher in the only FDA-approved clinical trial for MDMA and PTSD. So MDMA is commonly known as the party drug ecstasy, but it turns out that it has a pretty remarkable effect in helping people work through PTSD and trauma. And so I really wanted to get her on the podcast and talk about the study, and especially how the body is part of the traumatic response. Basically, their thinking, as I understand it, is that something like MDMA helps take the amygdala offline, basically turns off the part of the brain that's dealing with threat, so that you can essentially experience and feel and process things that you're normally keeping out of your consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you get to do that in a context that's much more benign or agreeable or even pleasant, which has some interesting parallels to our work too. That we're actually giving people sometimes physical experiences that might be intense, but often it's in a context that's agreeable or pleasant, or that we can relax into, and then things are better or different afterwards.
Yeah. And I think there is a lot of corollary between many of those kinds of experiences and some of the things that happen in our massage sessions. And there's a lot that we can learn from some of those kinds of explorations for sure.
So that was episode 45. She talked to about MAPS, the organization that is seeing through her phase 3 trials and things like that. So it was a good conversation.
Yeah.
And then you got to talk with Doug Nelson in episode 44. You called it table lessons, but you went a few places with him.
Yes, indeed. So table lessons, this name came, of course, from Doug's books. He's got, 2-volume series called Table Lessons, which is basically stories from his practice of things that he's encountered. And one of the things that I brought up a lot in our discussion, and I really liked the way he handled this in his books, was these weren't a series of kind of lessons of here's what was wrong and here's what I did to fix it. Most of these stories in the clinical environment left with question marks at the end about like what really happened, what were some of these outcomes, where did this go? Because that kind of often is the case in many of our situations, that we may not get full resolution on a lot of kinds of things. And each one of these kinds of encounters in the clinical treatment room often leave us with questions about what did we do, what did we not do, or what did I learn out of this kind of situation? And that was a really valuable perspective that I think to hear him talk about from decades and decades of lots and lots of treatment sessions with probably thousands of clients at this point.
Oh, he's a great spokesperson for that point of view.
Yeah.
Of that questioning and listening perspective.
Yeah. And another thing that he really brought to the forefront too, and this is, valuable coming from somebody who, at the point that we were talking, he was the president of the Massage Therapy Foundation and has been very involved with research for many years, looking at the importance of translating that research into our clinical practice, but also keeping in mind that in many instances, what happens in clinical research can often be somewhat fictitious, and I don't know if fictitious is the right word, but constructed environments that aren't really reflective of what happens with our direct one-to-one interactions with people in the treatment room. So keep that in mind sometimes as you're reading and looking at research studies, that some of these kinds of environments could have different impacts or different results and outcomes, because that's not really a real treatment environment.
The context isn't always the same as we're dealing with. And so the conclusions may or may not be relevant. Of course, you're saying, keep that in mind as you're reading your research. I'm saying, I would say put it out of your mind if you stop yourself from reading research because of that, because that's often one of those reasons we have for not seeing what we can learn from research. It's like, that's research. That's not really that relevant. True. And maybe there are ways that we can learn something from that, of course.
Yep, indeed. And we had a fascinating discussion with Robert Schleip in episode 45.
Speaking of research.
Speaking of research, and based on his book, Fascia in Sport and Movement. And he shared with us, some of the new things that he's discovering, working on. And we talked a great deal about, what is going on with under our hands, and what are some of the both misconceptions and concepts and ideas that really tell us about what's happening with this particular type of approach. Some really fascinating stuff that we learned from him there.
He's been an inspiration and a mentor of mine, as I've mentioned before. But his book is titled, like you said, Fascia in Sport and Movement. And yet his background is as a manual therapist. So I really wanted to connect that. I'm going to come back and see how what he's writing about, or getting all of the other contributors to that book to write about how that applies to manual therapy. And he accommodated me, but it was also the case that so much of what he's saying is like, we need to be moving people more. We need to get people over their lack of movement in the right dosage. Because he made it a couple times in our talk, it's not like just more movement is better. Somebody who runs every day might have more Achilles tendon issues than someone who just runs 3 times a week. But the couch potato has even more than either one of them, he says. So there's a way that keeping our physical body, our connective tissues, like our fascia, healthy through movement and activity is really important. And then his background as a manual therapist, of course, and the people that he invites him to talk about that in the book is really educational for me.
Yeah. And I think that had a lot of connections with other things that we were talking about with a couple other episodes emphasizing movement. That came up again, both in the episode that I had with Jamie Johnston and Eric Purvis, and also in our discussions with Todd Hargrove, who's been a big movement advocate for so many years. And I think we're seeing and hearing a lot more of that whole concept and idea of movement really needs to become a lot more integrated in what we do with many of our client approaches.
Well, at least if we want a shift in symptoms, because often there's, that's what our clients want. They want less pain, or they want to move better.
Yeah.
And so there's a limit as to what we can do passively with someone on the table. There's a lot we can do, but there's a limit too, at least if the goal is to shift someone's ongoing chronic symptom. That often that does come down to movement as being the way that's going to change.
Yeah.
And Robert was clear about that. He also, he made his, the soundbite, of course, from that conversation was that he saw a lot of the debates around whether fascia changed or not as being a North American social media phenomenon. He said that in their world of research is like, of course it changes. And in fact, we're learning more about how it does, maybe not in the plastic, simplistic way a lot of us body workers were taught, but there's change going on all the time. Fascia.
Yeah. And so in episode 46, we got into iliotibial band controversies and approaches, some of the things trying to better understand and dive deep and explore some what's going on in the IT band. This is one of those, speaking of fascial and connective tissues, one of those ones that gets a lot of focus and attention, both because of its size, mechanical role, and role that it plays in a lot of other kinds of disorders in the lower extremity, hip and pelvis region.
Let's say roll a few more times as we talk about this. ITB, because again, that's one of the controversies, like, should we roll it or should we
roll in a different way.
And we do talk about that in that episode, and we talk about the ways that I think we each approach it, and some of the reasons we might even be an issue in our populace. Sensitivity there on the outside of the leg, its role in balance and stability across the knee, those kinds of things.
Yeah. So we did some kind of deep dive into physiology of the iliotibial band, looking at its, physiological makeup, and also biomechanically what it's really designed to be doing, and like, can you loosen it in particular, and should you be trying to do that?
Is that the goal, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And that was even with that, those considerations and caveats, we found hands-on things to share. And that was one of those episodes where we put together a handout. You pulled some of your gems out of your treasure chest, and I threw a couple in myself. I threw in some gravel to mix it up, and then we put it out as a handout that people could go download for free for that one and a few of the others as well.
Yeah. So, we kind of continued our lower extremity structure and biomechanical approaches in episode 47, talking about over-pronation.
Yeah.
Getting over-pronation was our title of that episode. That was kind of interesting. You were doing some foot and ankle stuff with a course at that time, I believe, right?
That was one of the 2-month online principles courses about the foot, knee, and leg. But the over-pronation story, and I enjoyed taking the devil's advocate and really highlighting the research that questions whether or not over-pronation is a problem. Like, it's pain or difficulty or performance issues are not really well correlated with arch height. It's not like if you have a low arch, you have more foot pain statistically.
Yeah.
So looking at some of our goals or our assumptions there around when we're working with an ankle that pronates a lot or doesn't pronate a lot.
Yeah. So, and these are things too that are constantly, I think, evolving with our understanding, better biomechanical, physiological understandings of what's happening in those tissues, and seeing what's the role of manual therapy in trying to address some of these things. Because this gets back to the whole movement issue. We can do all kinds of work with people's feet when they're on the treatment table, and that may or may not change a whole lot of what they're doing with movement when they actually get out and start moving around a lot. So we have to look at, how do we help support better, more appropriate movement, if that's a necessary goal or not.
Well, and then if we do take the movement lens, how would that change our table work? Because it's totally changed my table work in the last 10, 15 years, to think that movement becomes the goal, and or helping someone move more and easier and more comfortably in their own life. What if that's the goal? What if that's the result I want from my table work?
Yeah.
Into something that is so solid as an ankle joint, where and the foot, the tarsal bones, those kind of relationships. What are some things we can do that actually make movement more possible in the ways that we hope it to be? Yeah.
So as we talk about controversies and issues, that certainly came up. We did a rebroadcast in episode 48 of an episode we had done earlier on Psoas work. Is it safe and is it necessary?
Yeah, we picked that because it was one of our most downloaded episodes from the previous year. And sure enough, this year again, it got right up there. People want to hear about the Psoas, and I think it's one of those love-hate things. And I can be sure that if I do, if I want some interesting controversy, all I have to do is mention Psoas on social media, and sure enough, some people will be, everything from it's the sacred seat of the soul to this is a bunch of hooey.
Yeah,
and you can't even touch it. So why are you talking about it, or shouldn't be even touching it? So we do talk about that range of perspectives and where we each stand on that in our own approaches toward working with the Psoas.
Yeah. So it's, I think, not going away anytime soon. It's probably going to continue to be that. So if you were feeling lonely and want some interaction with people, go out and poke the bear and say, Psoas and work with this on social media.
Yes. Psoas work is God, or Psoas work is baloney, whatever one you want, just say that. And it's that's a response.
Post it in one group, Psoas work is God, and post it in another group of Psoas work is baloney, and see what your responses are. So
that's it.
So 49. Then where'd we go? 49.
Yeah.
What do you feel? We should have done this episode with an old overdub of Peter Frampton's Do you feel like I do song or something like that for our interoception?
Yeah. Well, I got to say background music is on my wish list. I don't know if we're going to get it in 2022, but sometime. Yeah. So that's a great one. I'm going to make a note of that.
Maybe you and I should do some background karaoke to some of these episodes or something, and that'll make our listener list drive down.
You do the soundtrack and I'll do the visual. How about that? I'll lip sync to your sound.
Okay.
But episode 49, we talked about interoception. And that was an article, a topic that I picked to write for massage and bodywork. And you were kind enough to interview me on that and help me elucidate or elaborate some of the ideas I had about it. And the article was called 3 Questions on Interoception. And I took 3 common questions that therapists ask their clients, like, are you comfortable? How's the pressure? And can you relax into that? And looked at them from an interoceptive point of view, like how the brain, what parts of the brain you're actually asking to come online when you ask those questions, and how to actually help get useful answers to those questions through useful responses as well. And then, like you said, the role of just feeling in general, how maybe feeling becomes, if we think about feeling as like a medium, maybe there's muscle, there's connective tissue, there's movement, but maybe it's even feeling, the perception or the sensation that we're producing with our hands.
Yeah. And, you have talked about this a number of times, and I think this is really valuable, is for us to kind of zero in on some of those sorts of things when we talk about treatment goals with our clients. What do you want to be feeling when this is complete, or how will you determine this is complete? How will you feel?
That's right. How will the client feel? And also how are we feeling? Where does our interoception as practitioners play into that? What happens in our bodies as we're working, and how can we incorporate that? Use that.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Episode
and
50.
So 50, we had, this was an episode I did, an interview with Jamie Johnston and Eric Purvis from the Massage Therapy Development Collective podcast in Canada. We talked about a lot of across the border issues. I think I said collective, I meant initiative, Massage Therapy Development Initiative for their podcast there. So this was an interesting exploration of things that we've grappled with here in the US and things they've grappled with in Canada along similar lines, especially around educational requirements, types of program evaluations, some of the issues around continuing education, things like that. And always good to have a different lens to look through, to look at some of these different issues and see how they're perceived in these different, because there's cultural, legislative, systematic things that all influence the way our professions are perceived in different places. And it was really, it's always good to get outside your own lens of bias and look at that through different glasses.
That's right. And I think most American therapists are aware that a Canadian massage therapist typically has been through a whole lot more formal schooling than their American counterparts, at least in the field of massage therapy. And so it's always interesting for me to have those conversations across the border. But then the teaching I've done in Canada too pushes my technical skill to another level, and then looking for ways that we can dialogue and talk about our work that are useful from both perspectives. But no, it's great. I enjoyed the conversation you had with them and their own dedication toward raising the bar, but in a balanced way that includes not just the technical.
Yeah. Great. And another important point they brought up in this discussion too, and I've had this discussion with a couple other practitioners, is, we often make these sort of more generalized statements about massage therapy education being so much more extensive in Canada. And that is not necessarily true. It depends on what province you're talking about, because, Ontario and British Columbia, that's probably true.
I see.
In Alberta and Manitoba, it's not. So,
Thank you.
That's one of those things that we get kind of sucked into some of those kinds of generalizations, both about education there as well as here in the U.S. as well.
All right.
I think, important distinctions.
I stand corrected and I stand specified. So thank you for that.
Yeah. So in our episode 51, we had a great conversation with Todd Hargrove on neuroinflammation, which I know a topic near and dear to your heart,
Yeah.
their focus on inflammation and everything.
Yep. And it's neuroinflammation being a systemic inflammation that affects the functioning of the nerves or might even inflame the nerves themselves. And Todd did an eloquent blog post on some of the sources of that or effects of that. So it was great to get him on the show and have a conversation with him about that and about inflammation in general. And we went a few places together, but I did also enjoy that conversation with him. And again, he's got a background as a manual therapist. So we're connecting those dots back to what we can do on the table and with our hands in a way that I found really interesting and satisfying.
Yeah. And for those not familiar with Todd, he's done some wonderful explorations and put together some really good stuff. He's got a very fascinating podcast too. I would encourage you to take a listen to that, the Better Movement podcast, and some other things that he's put together in a book he's published and everything like that. So a great resource there for expanding your vision about what you're doing with soft tissue work.
Check it out. I mean, that was episode 51. And all these guests were mentioning. I mean, we should just be pointing people to the show notes because both on your side and on mine, we do list the resources we're talking about or how to dive in a little deeper with this.
Yep, absolutely.
Then we're almost wrapping up the year. Episode 52, I got to talk to you about orthopedic special tests, which had come up in your conversation with Jamie Johnston and Eric Purvis. But we got to really pick your brain about those and the role that you see for those or not.
Yeah. And this is a really valuable kind of reflective piece for me because, having written a book on orthopedic assessment, that was a huge part of what I have spent many, many years teaching. And I've really changed perspective a great deal on how much emphasis we put on those and how much we use them for the whole tissue evaluation process when we're trying to figure out what might be going on with our clients. There's still one of the things that we kind of mentioned, and there's still value in these procedures and they can be used more effectively. We got some comments that came back from people about this and a few other things that came up in some of the Facebook groups and stuff about these things. And I think one of the key themes around there is there's still some significant value in many of these tests for ruling out really serious problems in many instances. They may not be as accurate in really giving us confirmation that something's there, but they can certainly be helpful in many instances to rule out more serious types of complaints. And the other thing that I would really emphasize that came out of that is that they should never be used in a vacuum of just like, I'm just going to go through and do these shoulder tests and now I know what's going on. You're missing a whole bunch of information just with that kind of narrow vision. Well,
it's a interesting paradox because we want to know what's happening so that we can do something to help or affect it.
Yeah.
And these tests hold the promise of giving us some information.
Yeah.
If I can provoke the movement or if I feel a difference or the client feels a difference, then that tells me what to do. But they are out of favor in many ways and because of the if-then thinking. If I see this, then I should do that. And that's not always the case.
Yeah.
And you did talk about some great ways to balance that tendency.
Yeah.
And still find the usefulness in them.
I wanted to share also a quote I heard from somebody had posted this on social media the other day or a week or two ago or something in talking about, a topic similar to this of, when is it necessary that we really try to find out, what tissue might be causing certain types of things. Nice. And there are instances where, pain is not necessarily caused by specific tissue damage. Right. And that's become a big theme from a lot of, especially the pain science community. But that has also, I think, led people away from looking for it when it might potentially be an issue. And somebody had put this quote out there because there's, this concept, pain is not necessarily indicative of tissue damage, except when it is. And that's an important thing to remember is that there are still going to be times when it is. And if it's helpful to figure that out to manage your approach, that's valuable. But just keep in mind, remember that a lot of times it's not going to be as clearly identified as we once thought it might be.
Well, when a lot of the pain science debates were starting a decade ago, whatever it was, I mean, there were all the accusations of let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. just because it's not always the tissue doesn't mean it's never the tissue. And I think, again, a decade on or whatever it's been, we're finding a much more balanced or maybe nuanced perspective on the role that tissue can play in pain, and how our thinking in tissue bound ways might actually limit us.
Yeah.
Being effective there.
Yeah. So I like to think that we're getting back closer to a balance and away from a pendulum swing there. So that's a good thing.
Isn't it nice that society is becoming so balanced and swinging
we are
so
very
little?
balanced. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have
Well,
so
there's
little
so many
discord, and we're very balanced.
Oh boy. Yeah. It's, I mean, we're all learning about that, aren't we? We're learning how to deal with discord. I hope that's what we're doing. At least we're getting a crash course in living through this.
Yeah.
Discord.
I'm not sure how much learning is going on right now.
Okay.
I think you're more right that we're getting a crash course and living with it. But I'm not convinced about how much learning is really happening.
I will tell.
Yeah.
In the meantime, lots of grist for our collective mills there.
Yeah.
What did we talk about next?
Our last episode of the year, content-wise, other than this one we're doing, was a interesting deep dive into some more fascial research with Dr. Antonio Stecco from Italy.
Yes.
Joined us for a fascinating conversation about these things.
Yeah, and his research has been really instrumental in helping define the different layers and mechanisms involved in the fascial effects that we do see, and what the actual effects are. He's come up with some interesting imaging ways, and he's particularly good at clarifying what can be a very amorphous situation there. So I was really pleased to have his ear and have give him a chance to talk through some of the questions together.
Yeah,
enjoyed that a lot.
Yeah, great discussion. And as you noted too, and he spoke about here, he and his whole family have been working on this for many years and have just put out a tremendous wealth of information of some really fascinating stuff if you want to, help expand your understanding and build out your library of great resources. They've got some wonderful things that they've been doing there in this work for a very long time.
Yep. All right, so that was our year, and then we have this one. Do you know what our top episodes were out of those 50 something?
I don't. I would have to go back and look at stats, but I'm going to hope that maybe you actually did that. And that was the prompt for doing it.
I did that, and let me pull up that page here. The top downloads, and just in terms of downloads, and it does vary quite a bit. It's really interesting to see, like a factor of 3 sometimes. Sometimes we're 3 times more interesting than other times. Yeah, apparently. But Robert Schleip again topped our charts like he did last year. Mm-hmm. Again, his episode, which was 45, again was our most downloaded episode. Also high on the charts was shoulder pain, impingement, and rotator cuff issues, 34. There's something about shoulder pain that really gets people's attention. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just think first of all, it's a common challenge for lots of clients, and it's something where we often don't see easy results. Makes people want to learn more about what's going on there and try to figure it out, because it's a complex region.
Yep.
Structurally and functionally.
It sure is. So a bunch of our technical episodes got real high downloads, as well as Todd Hargrove's and many of the others there along the way. But it's including our retrospective from last year, our version of this a year ago, where we gave an overview of what we've been talking about and pointed people back towards specific topics. Yeah, that was a popular one as well. Yeah. So what do you picture in our coming year, Whit?
I'm looking forward to some new fascinating discussions on all kinds of stuff. And as we always mention to folks, let us know if you got ideas of things that you want to hear some more about. I'm sure in this next year, we'll do a couple more deep dives on some specific clinical, pathological kinds of things. We'll have some more expansive discussions with people on, philosophical perspectives, expand our thinking and understanding of things, and hopefully interview some other researchers and people that have published stuff, and help you become a more broad thinking practitioner. That is our goal.
Thinking practitioner, there it is. Yeah, I've got a wish list of people to interview. And since I haven't asked them yet, I can't even say who it is, but I got some like dream conversations that I've been longing to have.
Yeah.
And then some
cool.
topics that I want to make sure that I get some time with are the continuing question of how do we actually inspire our clients to take action around their own health, whether it is
That's
to
a
go
big one.
whether it's to go for a walk or to be, interested enough in the session to report back what they're feeling or to make healthy choices in their life. What role do we have in that? That's kind of an ongoing line of inquiry for me.
I will look forward to listening to that episode.
It may be an episode, it may be a theme.
Maybe
and
a theme,
I'm going to welcome you to your 60s here pretty soon as you have your birthday in a couple of weeks. And then we'll see how that comes into as a theme. Like, how do we live well and age well and work as practitioners? How do we work well as we grow older as well?
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, I will look forward to another exciting and interesting and engaging year with you. So I look forward to some of those conversations.
It's true for me too.
Yeah. And we would also like to thank all of those people who've been hanging around listening, and in particular, thank our sponsors. ABMP in particular is proud to sponsor the Thinking Practitioner Podcast. And ABMP membership gives massage therapists and body workers exceptional liability insurance, numerous discounts, and great resources to help you thrive, like their ABMP podcast, which is available at abmp.com/podcasts or wherever you happen to listen.
And even if you're not a member, you can get free access to Massage and Bodywork magazine, where you, Whitney, and I are frequent contributors, and special offers for Thinking Practitioner listeners at abmp.com/thinking.
And we'd like to say a thank you to all of our sponsors in particular. If you can, stop by our sites for any handouts, show notes, transcripts, and any extras that are over there. You can find that from my site at academyofclinicalmassage.com. And Til, where can people find that from you?
advanced-trainings.com. If there are questions, suggestions, feedback, accolades, complaints, whatever you'd like, miracles, spontaneous remissions, etc. Write us about those at the email address, info@thethinkingpractitioner.com, or look for us each on social media, just at our names, Til Luchau, and your name.
Today,
Whitney.
my name is Whitney Lowe. You can find me over there that way under Whitlow on Twitter. I've shortened it that way because I was only allowed a certain number of characters to put in my name.
Yes.
Not true, but anyway. But in general, you can, if you will, this will be a favor for us. Rate us on Apple Podcasts, as it does help other people find the show. And you can hear us on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or wherever else you happen to listen. We do thank you for listening, and I hope you've gotten some good things out of that. So do please share the word and tell a friend. And of course, as always, if you're unable to find us in any of those locations, you can rub two sticks together on a night with a north wind and a harvest moon, and you'll hear us in the wind.
Wow. I haven't tried that. Is that like research-based?
It is. I've done all these things.
So cool.
I want to tell you. That's right.
That's awesome. No, you telling, our sponsors are kind enough to actually help us cover the cost of doing that, but you telling other people is how you help us cover those costs. So thanks for doing that, everybody. And thank you, Whitney, for another great year. I'm looking forward to the next one.
Indeed, me as well. So we'll see everybody else in a couple of weeks. Have a good late part of the year holiday season, and we'll talk to you soon.